What flavor of ice cream is your favorite? Hillary thinks the real reason I ask such questions in these videos is so that I have an excuse to eat something yummy. But I don't think that's true, do you? While I really am interested in certain flavors of ice cream making an appearance in this video, today I'm looking at what happens when we give things away and what happens when we help other people out. Come on, let me tell you what I think. Recently I've been thinking about some of the things that I can remember that happened when I was a small boy. This week I remembered a holiday we took to Ventnor on the Isle of Wight. Now, for those of you who are not from England, you may not know about this interesting place. It's located just off the south coast of England, and it had been a favourite holiday destination for Queen Victoria. So, of course, the rest of us Brits, we all have to go there and see, well, why did Queen Victoria like it so much? It really is an interesting place. There are a few strange things about it. First of all, the tides around the island, they're just weird. And there are 4 tides a day instead of just 2, which would be everywhere else. Although the extra tides are just not right either. And quite while a small island like that had so many trains on it is another mystery. But it did. Now you have my interest. Now, a lovely quirk of the trains there is that the line that takes the trains to the south side of the island has to go through a tunnel. And that tunnel used to flood. And instead of fixing the problem in a sensible way, the engineers instead raised the level of the tunnel floor by partially filling in the tunnel. Lovely. So now only trains that aren't very tall can fit through the tunnel. But that meant that until very recently, very, very old trains, in fact over 80-year-old trains, from the London Underground used to work the line. And now those trains have just been replaced recently with different old underground trains that aren't quite as old. Now, when we visited the island all those years ago, those trains were already old then. Now, sadly, the line had already stopped running to the seaside town of Ventnor even back then, but that's where we were to stay on holiday. How fun, so much to see. Dad had found a guest house to stay in, which was very unusual for us. We usually stayed with people we knew or in places that Dad had been asked to preach. Every morning we got up and we had breakfast, and it was a cooked breakfast. So we kids gorged ourselves. I think that was the idea too, because then we went out all day to play on the beach before getting back to a lovely evening meal. The sign outside said bed, breakfast and evening meal, and that is exactly what we did every day. Slept once and ate twice. The menu was set and there was no choice, but then we were used to that. You don't exactly get a choice as a small child each evening at home now, do you? The owner of the establishment was German, I think, certainly not local. She was lovely, but she was also very strict and insistent. I suppose that worked well with so many children staying in our house every day. Some of the meals were spectacular, and others, well, they were things we'd never eaten. But we knew better than to complain. Our parents had taught us very well. But then one evening, out came chocolate pudding. Now, you'll remember I asked, what flavour of ice cream is your favourite? Well, just about any is my favourite. I love ice cream. I'm not picky. Well, except chocolate. I just don't like chocolate ice cream. Chocolate pudding is fine, chocolate cake sometimes too, and hot drinking chocolate, that's great on a winter's night or even in the summer. But chocolate ice cream? And no thank you. Now my dad was the same with chocolate pudding. He loved pudding, but just not that pudding. So now we have a problem. There we all are around the table, and there at the head of the table is Dad, and he's just been served chocolate pudding. But Dad was clever. Once our host had left the room, he asked, "Who's been so good today that they deserve more pudding?" And all 5 children there instantly said, "Me!" Dad said, "I think you're all right." And he shared out the pudding, 1 spoon at a time, into all of the bowls. He presumably was congratulating himself when our host returned and noticed his early empty bowl. The host said, "You like my chocolate pudding? Lovely, I get you more." And before protest could be uttered, Dad's plate was heaped high. Down sat our host to wait for the empty plates, including that empty plate. There was no helping this situation. Remember, the children had already had extra pudding after a huge meal, so we were stuffed to the gills. For years after, those of us that understood or came to understand what had happened would say whenever Dad had an empty plate in front of him, "You like my chocolate pudding?" And it always got a grin. Now the idea that Dad was giving pudding to us because we'd been good is clearly inaccurate. But something happened there that illustrates what happens when you give things away. For whatever reason, when we're generous, not just with our money, but with our time, our stuff, our love and kindness, somehow it comes right back at us. You just can't seem to give stuff away without something nice happening back to you. You donate something special to a charity and then somehow get a huge hug back from a child who got a new teddy, and it's the one you just donated. You donate money and you can't really afford to give it that month, and instead of running short of cash that month, somehow, at the end of the month, you have more than you thought you would left over. You help out a local charity event. Someone cooks and they cook you a lovely meal. You cook a meal for a family in need and find yourself invited out to friends' house for dinner. Isn't it weird? When we talk about loving God and loving people, one of the ways love is displayed is in selflessly giving to others. Compassion and kindness that Christ has shown towards us somehow manages to leak out of us, and instead of us feeling empty, we actually feel even fuller. Sometimes giving, instead of us making us feel empty, makes us feel so full that we think we might even burst. I think chocolate pudding did that to us children long ago. I suppose having more, being dependent on giving more, isn't logical. But Luke records Jesus saying, "Give and you will receive. Your gift will return to you in full, pressed down, shaken together, to make room for more, running over and poured into your lap. The amount you give will determine the amount you get back." Perhaps that is what Jesus was talking about. Perhaps the chocolate pudding incident simply illustrated a principle in a fun way. But certainly over my lifetime, giving has had more benefits than you would ever expect. Do you have enough to give something to someone else? Have you ever noticed how selfish people never seem to have enough and always want more? And my favorite ice cream is butter pecan. No, it's strawberry. No, it's vanilla. I'll share it with you. But the time I got it to you, it would melt. Until next time, goodbye.